Secondly, airlines. We don't see the red line on the left is domestically owned or Caribbean-owned airlines. And then the blue on the right is OECD airlines, including charters. And this is just the number of airlines. What you see is places like Dominican Republic have no Caribbean airlines. So it's important to have airline access. We don't see in the data, and I should say a caveat, because it's difficult to always disentangle why do airlines go to the Caribbean. Do airlines bring tourists or do tourists bring airlines? We don't know. Nevertheless, the ownership, which is what we can speak of very clearly, doesn't necessarily have to be in domestic hands. You don't need to specialize in air service, right? You don't have to do everything. And then finally, the most diversified tourist countries, and once again, let me point out that the Dominican Republic and the Cuba, this is a Herfindahl index, which is a measure of industry dispersion. The most diversified tourist bases are the ones that are going to be less dependent on the US. So unless you're sure, or if you would like to hedge against potential US losses in the event that all of the new tourists, which we think are between 3 and 3.5 million on impact, unless you believe that all of the new tourists are coming from inside the United States as new tourists to the region, potential losses would be minimized as the date comes forward by playing down, or we should say playing up, non-US tourist bases. I'm done. Conclusions. Break up the value chain, and this is something that the minister spoke about yesterday, and specialize things like luxury tourism, et cetera, add value. Second, improve macroeconomic performance to bring flexibility if you're hit by a storm, if the oil price changes, et cetera. All of these things are not sexy, but they help. They help tremendously because it makes your country flexible. And third, and this is very important because we've seen this with the banana and the sugar subsidies, delaying and putting off the reforms ahead of a foreseeable change only increases the cost when the day of reckoning comes. So thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you, Raphael, and thanks to Mauricio as well. I'm sorry that we had to cut the presentations, but that's always the case when you have conferences. It's the norm, and I'm sure that the information will be available. I think both presentations were very useful in terms of the interconnectedness, and I was reminded, as you both were speaking, about some of the interesting developments we've had in Jamaica in relation, for example, to the foreign direct investment in the Spanish hotel chains linked to tourism from Spain, which actually may well help in our diversification process, but creates challenges in our own economy as we have debates between indigenous hotel operators and foreign direct investors. So there really are interesting linkages. And of course, the minute you start talking about specialization in air services, everybody in Jamaica starts to think about the perils of our own national airline, Air Jamaica. So there really are some very interesting links.
Yeah, for a visitor, that the earnings were very flat over time despite increases. So I'm wondering if you could perhaps suggest some explanation for that. And Raphael, I'm wondering if any of what Mauricio says might, modify some of your predictions in light of the fact that you're predicting that there's going to be a whole host of tourists from America going to Cuba. What is the impact possibly of the fact that there is this stable income per person?
To Senor Mauricio de Miranda. I was wondering why there was such a limited formation of fixed capital from the foreign direct investment in Cuba. It seemed extremely low. And furthermore, I suppose it's for both of you, you mentioned that Cuban tourism has more or less been sea and sun, but I would think that there is tremendous potential for historical and cultural tourism in Cuba, and that is already being exploited.
Thank you for Mauricio. I was just curious on your comments as I was seeing the analysis with regards to market access and international insertion and so on. It seemed to me that Cuba is facing the same dilemma many other countries in the region are facing, that they may have market access into countries in Latin America and the Caribbean, but they don't really have market entry because of productive issues, supply-demand issues, and price and quality competitiveness issues to actually compete in those different markets. And I'm wondering if you have any comments on that. Thank you.
Okay. En primer lugar, creo que el tema de la relativa estabilidad en los ingresos por persona se debe fundamentalmente a que se mantiene la característica de un turismo de medianos ingresos que no va a gastar especialmente a Cuba, sino que gasta esencialmente lo que ha pagado por el paquete turístico que ha sido contratado a través de una agencia.
Well, I believe, in essence, the explanation for the steady level of, or the steady yield per visitor to Cuba in terms of spending is based on the type of tourist that Cuba seems to attract, which is tourism, is a visitor that buys a package and spends within what is contained in that package and doesn't go any further into any other kind of spending.
Es decir, que los ingresos, los gastos adicionales de esos turistas en Cuba son bastante limitados.
Which means that any additional spending that they make in Cuba is very limited.
En los últimos años se han creado incluso se han hecho algunos campos de golf y todo esto como para estimular un turismo de más alto ingreso, de mayor nivel de ingresos.
In the last several years, there have been some investments in things like golf courses to perhaps attract more high-yielding tourists.
Pero eso no ha tenido un impacto significativo en un incremento de este tipo de turismo en Cuba.
But that has not led to any significant increase in that type of tourism to Cuba.
Y para vincular esto con el comentario suyo sobre el tema de las opciones culturales, claro que sí, Cuba tiene grandísimas opciones culturales, pero no son suficientemente explotadas con fines turísticos.
And to connect this to your point about cultural tourism in Cuba, yes, there is a tremendous amount of potential for cultural tourism in Cuba, but that has not been sufficiently exploited, even though there have been attempts in recent years.
Por ejemplo, las temporadas de las casas de ópera, de las casas de ballet, de los grandes eventos culturales en el mundo están en Internet.
For example, the schedules for season shows of the great opera houses and dance performers in the world are available on the Internet.
Ese no es el caso de actividades culturales cubanas como por ejemplo los festivales de ballet, los festivales de bolero, etcétera, que se sabe, se publica, pero uno no puede ni siquiera comprar una entrada por internet cuando ocurre con el resto del mundo.
But that is not the case in Cuba, where schedules for Cuban dance companies, bolero companies are not, and spectacles and festivals are not published on the internet, and much less you cannot purchase tickets for these events as you can in other venues in other parts of the world.